Hello, I'm Michael Pierce, and this is The Human Condition. Today, our topic is a bit of a book report. What I've been asked to do by you, the viewer, is to review some of the books that I've talked about and talk a little bit more about what they are and remind you of their title and their author and talk about just a bit of what's going on in those books. This won't take very long, but there's been a number of people that have asked questions about the health books that I refer to because some of them are old and out of print. So I think this will be a lot of fun for you. We do this periodically, and I will do it again and again. If you've seen me talk about a book or an author and you want to see it again, please write that in the comments below. With that, let's start with the first one. The Cholesterol Myths by Ufi Ravznikov. I don't very well know how to pronounce that, but this is a very famous book on cholesterol. And this book has been around for years and years, and it talks about the myths of cholesterol in medicine. This book is something that describes the myths of how cholesterol forms. In fact, it destroys the concept that you eat fat and you eat cholesterol and you get cholesterol clogging your arteries. That concept is dead. It is not true. It's never been true. And that is something that this book destroys. It also talks about the concept of where cholesterol actually comes from, which is excess carbohydrates in the diet. When a person eats excess carbohydrates in the diet, especially refined carbohydrates, they tend to cause oxidative damage in the walls of the vessels, and they create something called foam cells. And these foam cells get to work and they cause damage and inflammation inside the lining of your arteries. And that lining gets damaged, and the repair of that damage is the laying down of cholesterol. And that's how cholesterol plaques form generally. So the Cholesterol Myths also talks about statins and other drugs that are overused in the world and in the United States, and why and how we don't need to do that. And there are plenty of cardiologists on YouTube that do a better job than me talking about that, but I wanted you to see the original book and the original author that started this real revolution in writing. Because in America, at least for now, we're able to write books and have freedom of speech by writing books. We can't make claims, we can't sell products, we can't manufacture things, but we can write books. So I'm going to tell you about all these cool books. The next book is Love, Medicine, and Miracles by Dr. Bernie Siegel. Dr. Bernie Siegel is a famous cancer doctor, a medical doctor who coined the term exceptional cancer patients. And what he did in his books was he told stories about how he talked with his patients about being exceptional and beating cancer and getting their lives back, even if they didn't beat cancer, because some of them didn't beat the cancer. But generally, his experience was about people that beat their cancer by drawing pictures of their cancer and their emotions, by getting in touch with their emotions. It was a very right brain approach to looking at cancer in your life. The reason I have this book is because Bernie Siegel really inspired me years ago growing up. Funny thing happens in life. Things have circled back around, and I was asked by Bernie Siegel's team to be an author in his new book. And I am, and you'll see that book come out very soon here, and we'll be doing a book signing and launching of the new book focused around Bernie Siegel's team of writers. So look for that with us. The next book is Confessions of a Medical Heretic. This is Dr. Robert Mendelsohn, and Dr. Robert Mendelsohn inspired me greatly. He's a medical doctor out of Illinois who wrote when I was a child about all kinds of issues. And he wrote another book called Male Practice, which was about how men dominated in a kind of a chauvinistic way medicine back when I was a child, how to raise a healthy child in spite of your doctor. And he generated a newsletter called The People's Doctor, which was later called The Doctor's People. We used to subscribe to it. And so you'd get this paper typed document every month in the mail, and it would be this newsletter talking about medical issues and what was going on with the FDA and what was going on with parents, what was going on in politics and medicine and funding and research and ADHD, and he talked about all kinds of things. Now, one of the things that he talked about was mental health. And in his books, he talked about how medicine used too many drugs for mental health. And unfortunately, back then, he criticized EEGs. And I believe that his criticisms were wise because at the time, some doctors were using EEGs to prescribe drugs in ways that was not necessarily justified. And so Dr. Mendelsohn talked about how you could hook up the electrodes to a bowl of lime jello and you could get an EEG reading. That was kind of funny, but today I'm into EEGs and QEEGs and ERPs, which are brainwave measurements, and I'm in fact board certified in some of those methods. And so I very much do use EEG and QEEG and neurofeedback, which is quantitative electroencephalography. So even though Mendelsohn criticized it at the time, I understand why he did it, and I understand what he was doing. He was trying to criticize the overuse and misuse of medications. Now, Today, we actually like pharmaco-EEG, which is the idea that now we've learned how to use EEG to tell us which drugs we should not use. Back when Mendelsohn was talking about this, he wasn't describing doctors that were using EEG responsibly, using it to say you shouldn't have this drug because of these brain waves. Because back then they were just using it indiscriminately to say, yeah, you need to take all these drugs. If you haven't figured it out, I don't like to always have people on lots of polypharmacy, which is lots and lots of drugs, and because of morbidity and mortality, which is damage and death to people in their lives. So please look at Robert Mendelsohn. That's an old one, just like Bernie Siegel's one and Ravnikov's book. The next one is also very old. This is a mentor of mine who I knew before he passed, and this is John Yemianis. John Yemianis was a PhD with a huge family and a wonderful man. He was a great mentor to me, and he wrote Fluoride, the Aging Factor, among other books. He was a very famous researcher who studied fluoride for the U.S. congressional committees that wanted to know what was going on with fluoride in human health and illness, and water fluoridation and fluoridation of the mouth and every factor with regard to fluoride. And the Aging Factor, he talks about the research that he was part of when he studied fluoride and showed that it was damaging and a problem. I want to be clear that I am not a fan of the use of man-made fluoride in water. If a person drinks something like Fiji water that has a little bit of natural fluoride in it, it's not added. Usually 1 part per million or below is very safe, according to Yemianis and according to others, because it occurs in nature. There are natural fluoridated waters that occur in nature, and certain populations drink them. And that's how people first discovered the idea that we might fluoridate water, was because some populations had some natural fluoride. But we don't ever need more than 1 part per million, and we shouldn't add it to the water. Some parts around the world, people have fluoride and some don't. The United States adds fluoride to their water, not in every municipality, but in many. And it's one of the only countries in the world that does that. So I really think that we need to revisit our fluoridation of water policy. I'm not here to talk about dental fluoride treatments. If you choose a particular treatment for yourself, those are your own medical decisions, and you can make those decisions yourself. But to fluoridate the water supply and the food supply is a real problem for me, and I don't think it's wise, and as a doctor, I don't think it makes sense. The next book also is very old, Serge Grakovetsky. It's called The Spinal Engine, and it's out of print. Many of the books I talk about today are or were out of print, and they're very hard to get. This is a book about the spinal engine, and it taught me quite a bit as a chiropractor about how the spine works and how it doesn't work. If you're a medical doctor, if you're a patient and you've got a spinal problem and you want to understand how the spine actually works, the spinal engine describes in great detail. Grakovetsky goes through and describes how individuals who are missing legs, how they walk and how they ambulate, and how they can walk on their stumps. And they can walk on their stumps because their spine is an engine. And he talks about how the development of lizards occurred and how essentially in evolution animals took lateral movement, lateral bending like this, side bending of the spine, and we translated it into rotation with a lordosis, because the low back and the neck have a curve. It has a curve to it, and that curve translates lateral motions into rotational motions, and those rotational motions make us more efficient. So certainly a lizard like a gecko that moves in lateral motions like this, largely its front limbs and its hind limbs don't move a ton. Certainly they move some, but like an alligator or a crocodile, their limbs move, but largely it's their spine that bends. And as their spine bends, their legs advance and retreat, and they can place their limbs and they can ambulate, they can walk. But humans are bipedal. We walk on 2 legs, and part of what makes us so efficient is that we have that lumbar lordosis that translates lateral bending into rotational momentum and allows our hips to move like this, forward and backward, because our spine rotates. And so he talks about things like some runners have huge legs and some runners don't. Some runners have big back muscles and not huge legs, and what makes a runner efficient, whether they're leg powered or they're spine powered. And so how a person locomotes may affect how their spine degenerates over time, and if a person's going to be destined to get hip arthritis or spine arthritis or problems with their sacroiliac joint. And it talks about some gait analysis, which is how does a person walk? Do they have the proper sacroiliac rotations about a central axis, or do they just kind of throw their hips and legs forward? Do they use their legs mostly to run? And in fact, humans really use their spine to generate momentum to run efficiently. The next one is a very thick and large book. It's a little more modern. This is by Lawrence Afrin, MD. This is called Never Bet Against Occam. This is about, in reference to Occam's razor, which is the idea that Occam's razor cuts complexity, and it says if you're dealing with a complex compound problem, the simplest is probably the truest one. And so this book is a very thick book, and it talks about what happens in people that have mast cell activation syndrome, MACS. Mast cell activation syndrome is a problem where people make histamine-like molecules, usually because of high carbohydrates and other types of antigens in their lives, and other types of SNPs or inherited disorders of methylation, and disorders of problems where they don't handle histamine and histamine-like compounds very well. I use this in my work with POTS, postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, and Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, because these three syndromes all come together in people that have metabolic disorders, and I use metabolism to try to fix them. So these are things that I think you might really enjoy, and I think that you'll see that this book has lots of case studies, because mast cell activation syndrome is a very difficult thing to diagnose. It has a lot of difficulty in its chemistry, and Dr. Afrin is a hematologist oncologist who is exceedingly brilliant, and I've been in his classes. He is an absolutely marvelous teacher and an inspiring doctor for all of us. The last two books are both written by the same author. They're very thin and easy to use. This is The Back Mechanic by Stuart McGill, and this talks about how to step-by-step take care of your back, because the concept of McGill, your back is not locked up and tight and needs to be unlocked by a chiropractor or by heat or by therapy or by beating on it or stretching it, which is kind of the common idea. But actually, the spine is fundamentally deeply unstable and it wobbles too much. On the superficial type of assessment of the spine, you'll see that it's quite stiff. McGill says if you could get through that stiffness, deep down it's very unstable and there's a lot of wobbliness to these vertebrae. We call it the instantaneous axis of rotation if you're into biomechanics, but the general idea is that the vertebrae don't really stay on top of each other. They slop around, and then the rest of the superficial muscles tighten to make things stable. So you feel and present as if your back is stiff, and your doctor and your physical therapist and your chiropractor treat you as though you're stiff, but actually your problem is that fundamentally deep down you're unstable and sloppy. And so McGill tries to address that by assessments and treatments that are based on the idea of spinal instability. And I think this is a very nice contrarian method of treating people. He has another one called The Gift of Injury by Stuart McGill, again, very thin one. And this is a story where McGill talks about power lifters. There's nobody stronger than these power lifters. These guys are huge. These men and ladies are massively strong and powerful. They don't need more back exercises to get better. They've got strong muscles. The idea that they've got weak muscles is not a factor. And McGill built a huge career on rehabilitating powerlifters and weightlifters who had blown discs. He was able to rehabilitate them, some of which he could save from surgery, and some of which he could save after failed back surgery by doing his work, which once again, same idea, identify and treat areas of spinal instability with exercises that are aimed at creating stability, not strength. And so that stability idea of intersegmental stability is the contribution that I think Stuart McGill made to the professions of chiropractic and orthopedics and physical therapy. So that's my quick book report. I will do these again. I've gotten lots of feedback on how much you love these. Thank you very much.